Hello and welcome to the presentation. In this presentation, we'll be covering some of the most common objections to utilitarianism and some potential utilitarian replies. There are three major objections that we will be looking at. First, the objection that utilitarianism is not demanding enough. Second is the objection that utilitarianism is actually too demanding. And third is the objection that we should not treat everybody equally. Very briefly, the objection that utilitarianism is not demanding enough centers around utilitarians' inability to acknowledge absolute rights or moral rules. The objection that utilitarianism is too demanding centers around how much utilitarianism would seem to require of us in the way of self-sacrifice. And the objection that we should not treat everybody equally centers around the idea that we have special obligations to particular persons. To understand the objection that utilitarianism is not demanding enough, consider the following hypothetical situation. You are the sheriff of a small town during the Wild West era. You are essentially the law in this town. A murder of a white woman has been committed, and racism being what it was, especially then, almost everybody in the town is blaming a black farmhand who seemed to have a crush on her. The thing is, you know that this person could not be guilty of the crime because you saw him outside the town, and since he does not own a horse, there is no way he could have gotten back in time to have committed the murder. You try to explain this to the townsfolk, but they are having none of it. They won't listen to reason. They are convinced that the black man must be the killer. Eventually, the town is so worked up that you have to bring the man in and put him in a cell to protect him from the rest of the town. Later that night, a mob gathers around the sheriff's building and demands that you hang the black man for his crime. If you don't, it is clear that the mob will take out their anger on 6 other people of African descent in the town, killing them. You have just 2 choices. Either kill the man for a crime he didn't commit, or let 6 other innocents die. What should you do? It would seem that, according to utilitarianism, you should hang the innocent man, since 1 person suffering death would be better than 6 people suffering death. But the critic of utilitarianism says it is wrong to convict an innocent person of murder. As the sheriff, you have a duty to uphold the law, and this person has a right not to be executed for a crime you know he did not commit. Therefore, the critic concludes that utilitarianism is wrong. For a similar reason, utilitarianism is criticized for not being able to use backwards-looking reasons. Just like looking backwards for guilt isn't a factor, neither is looking backwards for promises and so forth. Only consequences ultimately matter for utilitarians. There are 2 major ways that utilitarians can try to respond to this. The first way is to say that a utilitarian really wouldn't hang the innocent man. The utilitarian might argue, for example, that the consequences that would result from allowing a mob to dictate punishment would outweigh the lives of the 6 people saved in the long run. For example, giving into mob rule might mean that you would be pressured by mobs in the future, and that this would undermine the justice system. Or it might be reasoned that the real murderer is still out there and likely to do more harm. Or it could be argued that once it is found out that an innocent person was executed, that this would mean more harm to faith in the justice system, causing more problems in the long run. Or some combination of these and other factors could be argued. The utilitarian considers all consequences after all. But this solution doesn't really solve the problem. The example could always be changed so that 7 people or 700 would be saved instead. At some point, this number would be high enough to outweigh the negative consequences of being coerced by the mob. A second response, and the one utilitarians are more likely to give, is that if you think there is something wrong with executing the 1 person to save 6 innocents, then you're not fully considering the rights of the 6 innocents not to be killed. It might seem terrible to kill an innocent, but the utilitarian might argue it is just as terrible for a different innocent to be killed, and in this case the number of innocent kills for not killing the first innocent would greatly outweigh that harm since there are so many more of them. The utilitarian would point out that all people in this case have a right not to be killed, but given that rights are going to be violated, it's better that 1 die than 6. Seemingly paradoxically, another objection to utilitarianism is that it is too demanding. Consider the following. To use Rachel's example, suppose that you have $10 in your pocket and you're going out to see a movie. On your way there, you notice a person, obviously hungry, who asks you for some money for food. You don't doubt that this person is sincerely hungry. What should you do? It seems clear that for the utilitarian, you should give the man your money for food, even if it means you do not see the movie. After all, the pleasure of seeing the movie is likely nothing compared to the pain you could save this man from starving all night long. And this might seem morally right, and even unproblematic as far as it goes. But now, what if we consider the fact that every time you go to see a movie, you should give your money to somebody who is hungry? Because you know that there is always somebody hungry in the world that you could give your money to easily enough, whether there's somebody there to ask you for it or not. And of course, it isn't just movies that you would have to give up. Even the smallest, humblest, most inexpensive luxury item costs money that would likely give somebody else more pleasure than you, or relieve more pain. And it isn't even just luxury items. Even decent food would have to be sacrificed. After all, you can live on bland, minimal food and use that money to stop somebody else from starving, which is far more painful than just having a limited diet. Indeed, you cannot even enjoy any luxury time, since any time you spend for yourself could have been spent working for others and likely sparing them more pain than you are causing yourself by working. You might make yourself miserable, but you would cause yourself less misery than the misery you would alleviate in others. Some critics' objection is that utilitarianism is just too demanding in these respects, and that nobody could be expected to sacrifice so much. The general utilitarian response here is to bite the bullet and say that yes, the moral thing would be to sacrifice just as much as the critic says, and to admit that nearly everybody falls short of that ideal. But the fact that people fall short of doing the morally right thing doesn't mean that it isn't the morally right thing to do. It just means it's very hard to do, and that perhaps few, if any, people can push themselves to moral perfection. The utilitarian would then recommend getting as close to moral perfection as one can. Peter Singer, a famous and current utilitarian philosopher and activist, for example, gives away 1/3 of all the money he makes. He would likely agree that he would be behaving in a morally better way if he gave away even more to help others. Then there is the objection that utilitarianism doesn't allow for special obligations to particular individuals. Here's another little thought experiment to illustrate the point. Suppose that you are a strong swimmer and you see two children drowning in a pool, each at opposite ends. In one end of the pool is your son, and in the other is your neighbor's son of approximately the same age. Your neighbor's son, though young, is recognized as having a genius-level intellect. He's also a very good-natured boy. He wants to grow up to be a heart surgeon. Your son is of average intelligence, likes to burn ants with a magnifying glass, and wants to grow up to be Magneto. Who should you save? According to utilitarianism, it would seem that you should save your neighbor's son. But according to the critic, you have already asked one question too many and should already be in the pool rescuing your own child. Why? Because there are some people who you have special obligations to, people such as your children and your friends. What's more, if you treat everybody equally, personal relationships become difficult. The utilitarian response to this objection could be to bite the bullet by saying that being neutral is in fact the right thing to do. The utilitarian might also argue that in most day-to-day trivial cases where people favor people they have relationships, for example doing your friend a favor when you could have done a favor for somebody who might have needed one just a little bit more but who is only an acquaintance, are so minor that they don't really count as moral decisions. And that ends this presentation. Until next time.